The truth is that many of us have never given our own safety a significant thought when it came to running. We run during the day and in well-populated areas, doing enough to feel safe. But as more and more women are murdered while running, the grim truth that the next one could be one of us stares back at us in the mirror. And we have to face the facts. We are not safe while doing something we love. The thing that brings us joy, confidence, and a sense of worth could be the very thing that gets us murdered or missing. I'm going to tell you these stories because every runner matters. Every single woman who laced up her shoes and didn't come back alive deserves to have her story told. And to every woman still heading out the door, taking extra precautions to try to ensure she comes home, I see you. I am you. This is Girl Gone Running, a Tragedy with a View series about murdered and missing runners. I am your host, Kayla. Welcome back. This is the very first episode of Girl Gone Running, a series that I did not intend to do on my own, but life got in the way as it usually does, and instead of scrapping this idea, I decided to embrace the challenges and move forward with it on my own. To give you a brief background and what to expect here, this is different from my usual content, but because I am a runner, this subject sits extremely close to my heart, and of course, I want to talk about it. So, what started out as an idea for just telling the stories of women who have been murdered while running on the trails or in forests pretty quickly came to feel wrong. And so, while it is not fully on brand with the podcast theme, I decided that I will tell every murdered runner's story, no matter how much information is out there, which means that some, or even many, of these stories will be short. Welcome to the very first episode of Girl Gone Running. This is a 12-week series where I will be releasing an additional episode each week. Subscribers will have access to all 12 episodes. Non-subscribers will have access to 8, so every third episode will be locked. I plan to do periodic releases depending on my schedule and what all I have going on at the time. But I am going to continue to tell every woman's story who has been murdered and gone missing while running. Because just like every one of you, our lives matter and our stories matter, and they impacted people. Now, Alma Mendez was a vibrant and lively mother, sister, and daughter. She worked hard in her job, and as the office manager of a dental office, she came into contact with a lot of people, and she helped to build and cultivate these connections with others. She loved her children and was active in her church as well. Blessed with kind eyes and a friendly smile, Alma was always the first person to greet others and help to make them feel welcome. She was happy, and despite some stress, she did all that she could to be a good mother, a good friend, and a good sister. Alma's children were all older. I couldn't find their exact ages, but I do know that the youngest was old enough to be left alone, and Alma was actually expecting her first grandchild just a month away. At 37, Alma was making some life-shifting changes, such as helping her family cope with her mother's brain aneurysm and divorcing her husband, Conrad Mendez, who she had been married to for 19 years. She had actually separated from him in early October of 2007. But something she did not alter was her daily runs at Sauk Trail Lake, south of downtown Chicago, near Chicago Heights. This area is about 30 miles south of downtown Chicago and is kind of a lower middle class area. The Sauk Trail Lake is inside the Cook County Forest Preserve, and from what I could tell from reading about the preserve online, it kind of has different sections that are separate from each other, but the trail systems connect these different areas of the preserve. One of those trails is Sauk Trail, which is a paved 23.5-mile loop that encompasses a 29-acre lake. Surrounding the lake are beautiful pines and giant oak trees, and it is really just a calming and happy place to be. The section of the preserve that Alma was going to had a 3.5-mile loop or a 5.5-mile kilometer loop that was within this section. And part of that loop was on the same trail that took you completely around the lake, which also seems weird to me to define 29 acres as a lake. It is kind of easy for me to visualize what 29 acres looks like because I know that my home sits on 5 acres, and so do both of my neighbors. So I just kind of double our properties, and that's what the water is. And in my mind, that doesn't comprehend to the size of a lake, especially because I live very close to the Great Lakes. But a lake is defined as a naturally occurring fixed inland body of water. So I'm not going to argue with the distinction that it is a lake. I'm just communicating that in comparison to the Great Lakes, which I've recognized as lakes for my entire life, 29 acres feels more like a pond. Coming back to Alma, she normally ran in the early morning hours before work, but on October 28, 2007, Alma drove her 2005 Ford Freestyle SUV to the preserve and parked in the parking lot and started her run sometime between 1 and 2 in the afternoon. She had a habit of calling one of her sisters while she was on her way to the park and talking to them for at least part of her run. On this Sunday, Alma first called her sister Jessie, and they talked until about 1:15 as someone arrived at Jessie's home. About a half hour later, Jessie returned Alma's call but did not get an answer. It was at about 2 p.m., so maybe even roughly the same time that Jessie was calling her, that Alma called her friend Star Garcia and left her a voicemail, basically saying, "Hey, give me a call back. I have something really important to tell you," which could mean anything. Back home, as the sun was beginning to set, her family began to get a little unsettled. Alma was never late without a reason, and this was 2007. She had her cell phone on her, and it was really odd that she hadn't called to say that she was running late or that she was stopping to do something. Without being able to get a hold of her, Alma's son called his aunt, Maria Lopez, who was a sister of Alma, and she is who called to report Alma missing. They reported that she had been wearing a blue jogging suit. Police, while there's this idea that they won't do anything until a person has been missing for 48 hours, that's not always the case. When police went to the preserve, which was her last known location, they found her car there, which told them that she either was still in the park or she left with someone else. Her family insisted that if she left the park, it was by force. She wouldn't abandon her family willingly. With this information, the search was launched immediately. People were questioned and asked to come forward with information. And while initially there were no signs of Alma being in the park besides her car being parked there, that would soon change. From 8 p.m. that Sunday to 3:30 a.m. Monday morning, dozens of volunteers, family members, and police arrived in the preserve to search for Alma. Police dogs were brought in with them to search, and I'm not sure if they were scent dogs or cadaver dogs, but either way, they didn't signal much of anything. Which, we have talked about dogs before and their sense of smell, and the frustrating thing for search dogs is that the more smells that are in an area, the harder it is for them to find the single one that they are looking for. Because the area is so diluted with scents, it becomes essentially contaminated. As soon as the sun was up, again, they returned to the park and continued to search until the sun went down the following day. This time, not just with people on the ground, but with helicopters in the air as well. On October 30th, one of the searchers saw a body floating about 15 feet from the bank of the water of Sauk Lake. As people began to charge forward towards the water, hoping that the person floating would either not be Alma or would be Alma alive, they found that it was the body of a woman and she was wearing blue. Before police arrived, volunteers began trying to get into the water to retrieve the body, which is something that you should never do because police need to process the scene. Unless someone is clearly alive and struggling and you have the education and skill to perform a rescue, you should not be intervening in a case like this. Because if someone appears to be deceased, you need to let the police process the scene. The more people who get involved, the more likely evidence is going to be contaminated or ruined or disappear altogether. Sonia Chavez, who was searching for her friend Alma, was there when she heard the shouts of the body being found in the water, and she was able to confirm that this woman was Alma. According to the autopsy, Alma suffered from several severe blunt force trauma injuries, and her throat had been sliced open, not just once, but several times. And then Alma was placed in the water. Alma's body was pulled from the water fully clothed, and the autopsy confirmed that she had not been sexually assaulted. There have been many questions about how no one found Alma immediately since she was pretty close to the bank of the lake, and there is a really simple explanation for this. Bodies sink. Unless there is something to keep you afloat, again, bodies will sink. But then as decomposition takes place, usually around the 48 to 72 hour window, the decomposition will produce enough gases within the chest cavity and the abdomen of a body that this will allow it to float back to the surface. Alma was attacked on Sunday the 28th, and she was found on Tuesday the 30th, putting the timing right at the beginning of that 48-hour window. Of course, this discovery caused panic because people feared that a predator was now loose in the park, but this did provide some good results. Multiple people came forward saying they saw something really weird on the trail the day of October 28th. A truck. It was a small, two-door, gray truck. With this information, they now understood the reason for Alma's injuries. She had clearly been struck by a vehicle, and they could tell that this was not an accident. And I quickly want to circle back to the search dogs. We talked briefly about this in episode 9, which included where certain scents overwhelm a dog's sense of smell, and it will basically just turn off for a period of time. And one of those is diesel fumes. And I would be willing to bet that in certain concentrations, gasoline has a similar effect. Since we now know that she was hit by a truck, we can kind of explain why the dogs might have been unable to follow her scent. So, of course, one of the first people to be questioned was Alma's husband, Conrad, who she had just separated from just weeks prior. It makes sense for everyone to go there. Statistically speaking, you are most likely to be murdered by your significant other. In addition to this, if the relationship was ending because of her decision and not his, this might create some space for anger and resentment to build up and actions to be taken that otherwise wouldn't be. He had been with Alma for 19 years. He would know her schedule and where she liked to run and where she parked and what she drove. But after questioning, he was never publicly labeled as a suspect or even a person of interest. So there are, of course, a few theories about what happened here. One being that this was a random attack from a person who was intending to commit this crime. There are some people who believe that this person who was driving the truck was either mentally unsound or potentially using drugs and or alcohol, and they were just driving along, not even realizing that they were on a walking trail until they hit Alma. At this point, they realized that they made a huge mistake, cut Alma's throat to ensure that she was dead and wouldn't be able to turn them in, and then dumped her in the lake. However, I think that this attack looks a little bit more passionate and intentional. Running someone over your car is something that you think about, and you have time to change your mind, especially when you are driving on a walking and running trail. She also was not there at her normal time. If this was an attack on Alma, she either communicated that she was going to be there at this time, so this person knew when to look for her there, or they had been waiting here, stalking the area all day. Maybe they weren't really waiting in the park, but they drove past repeatedly until they saw her car. Of course, there is the theory that her husband attacked her, and this just seems unlikely to me, as he was never labeled as a person of interest or a suspect in the 18 years since this crime happened. It would also be relatively easy to verify if this vehicle matched the one seen in the park. There's a possibility that Alma and Conrad would be facing a nasty divorce. No divorce is easy, but once kids are involved, it can get way worse, especially if those kids are under 18. So I can understand why people believe that Conrad might have done this. But he also had an alibi because he had been with his family the entire day. With nothing to go on, the case went cold and has stayed that way. The Cook County Sheriff stands by that someone knows something. There were people in the park. It was in broad daylight, and of course, it is clear that someone committed this violent attack on Alma. Someone, at least one person, out there knows what happened. To leave a family without answers is devastating and unfair, not just to Alma, but to all of Alma's family and friends. If you know something, or if you were in this area on October 28th, 2007, and have any information that could help investigators get answers for Alma, the Cook County Sheriffs can be contacted at 708-865-4549. Alma was a woman whose spirit radiated warmth and kindness. She was a dedicated mother, a loving sister, and a cherished friend. Her presence brought joy and unity to those around her, and her tragic and untimely death has left an irreplaceable void in the lives of her family. Alma's murder remains an unsolved mystery, a reminder of the fragility of life and the senselessness of violence. The police continue to work tirelessly on this case, but certain details must remain confidential to protect the integrity of the investigation. This secrecy is crucial in ensuring that justice can eventually be served and that the real perpetrator is brought to justice. The resolution of cold cases holds profound significance for several reasons. Those unsolved cases represent unresolved injustices, leaving victims' families in a state of perpetual grief and uncertainty. Solving cold cases provides a sense of closure and justice, acknowledging the pain and suffering endured by the victims and their loved ones. Moreover, the successful resolution of these cases can have a broader societal impact. It reaffirms the principle that no crime should go unpunished, regardless of the passage of time, and underscores the commitment of law enforcement to uphold justice. The advancements in forensic science and investigative techniques means that many cold cases, once thought unsolvable, now have the potential to be resolved. Additionally, solving cold cases can prevent future crimes. Offenders who have remained at large may continue to pose a threat to society, and bringing them to justice can protect others from that harm. The investigation and resolution of cold cases also serves as a deterrent to potential criminals, reinforcing the message that justice is relentless and inevitable. Ultimately, the pursuit of justice in cold cases honors the memory of the victims, supports the healing process for their families, and strengthens the moral fabric of society. It is a testament to our collective resolve to seek truth and justice no matter how long it takes. And that is what we are aiming for here by telling these cold case stories. The stories that don't have a lot of information, the stories that are short and therefore not being told. Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this very first episode. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithAview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.